On the Strong Women podcast today, we have the pleasure of talking with Emily Colson. Now, I want to tell you, I'm going to introduce Emily as my friend because Emily is my friend, and I want you all to know her. And like that, I just want to say, hey, you guys, this is Emily. Emily, this is you guys. So, but I got to back up just a little bit and say that when I first came to my husband and I said, hey, I have this idea to do a podcast about strong women. And what I mean by strong women are those women who are walking faithfully with Christ in their spheres of influence. And what do you think about that? And he goes, I love this idea. Get a piece of paper. Let's write some names down. Well, Emily was like one of the first 5 that we wrote down, and we've been trying to get her. But of course, COVID has rocked Emily's world, and we will find out more about that later. But the way John and I, my husband and I, got to know Emily is that she's Chuck Colson's daughter. And so originally that was our first connection, but she's quickly become a dear friend to us, and we're so grateful for how God is working in her life, how he's working in others because of her. And so we're thrilled to have Emily on to talk about a lot of things, but just a sneak peek, we're going to talk about how she grew up. We are going to talk about Chuck Colson because you can't avoid it, right? You had a wonderful relationship with your father, and he was very influential in your life, and of course, many others. And so we will talk about her relationship with her dad and growing up in the unique home that she did. And then we will also talk about some ministry things that she's just coming into right now. And so that's a sneak peek. There'll be more, but stay with us. And thank you so much, Emily, for coming.
What a joy to be with both of you, Erin and Sarah. It's really a thrill. I'm truly honored, and you're both doing such a wonderful job with this podcast. The ones that I've listened to have just been so delightful. So I wish that we could all be sitting in the same room, but it kind of feels like we are.
Yes, I know. I agree.
You have been on our list from the beginning, and so we have patiently waited. But we just have been patiently anticipating getting to talk to you. So we're excited to let our audience know who you are. Of course, this podcast, Strong Women Podcast, is a part of the Colson Center. Chuck Colson was your dad. But a lot of our young listeners don't know who your dad was. And I'm excited to introduce them to him through you. But I want to do that by, of course, telling your story. And so can you start us with way back when little Emily was little and where you grew up, the kind of home you grew up in? Was it a Christian home? Of course, Sarah and I know a lot of the answers to these questions, but as I say, some of our listeners don't. So let's start at your beginning and just tell us about your home growing up.
Well, thank you. And I am blessed to have had an extraordinary dad. It overwhelms me. Sometimes I miss him tremendously. He has been gone almost 10 years. And I'm just grateful every day for how God has impacted me with this extraordinary dad. I have an extraordinary mom who I'm grateful to say is still with us. She's 90 years old. Oh. Growing up was, everybody has their own normal, right? So yes. I don't think I really realized how unusual my life might have been at the time until you look back and can see the whole picture sort of what God did in my dad's life and the impact of what God did through him and through his giving his life to Christ and through his yes to God over and over, his yes to God, even in really difficult times. My parents, way before my dad became a Christian, divorced when I was just 4 or 5 years old, so very young. My brothers and I grew up with my mom in Massachusetts, outside of Boston. And my dad, of course, was in Washington, and he was on the power track. and ended up in the White House when, I think I was in 6th grade when my dad went to the White House to serve as special counsel to President Nixon. And so my brothers and I, from a very early age, we would be the only kids on an airplane, and we would be flying back and forth from Boston to Washington and back again, and always in the bulkhead. And I just remember so vividly, we were the only kids, and everybody back then, which was lovely, all the men were in suits. And if the women were on the planes, they were very dressed up. Everyone was dressed up on the plane.
And the food was good, right?
And the food was, you got free Coke, which I just thought, how does it get any better than the free Coke? So we just, we sat the whole time just, drinking Cokes and these little TV dinners and unidentifiable objects. But it was really fun because it felt like it was free. Of course, it wasn't free, but it felt like it was. And I remember so many people stopping us and saying, "What are you kids doing on the plane?" And we'd say, we're going to see our dad. And I remember they'd always say, "Who's your dad?" It was just not normal that kids would be on an airplane. And so we had this very interesting combination of going to Washington, and of course we'd get to do all sorts of things that maybe other people didn't get to do on the typical Washington tour, and special privileges getting in places and special tours and eventually going into the White House, and then this wonderful balance of my mom, who is just prioritizes joy and never, ever is interested in being in the spotlight, and prioritizes creativity and encouraged us to really think creatively, try things out of our comfort zone, build things. We didn't have... My mom will listen to this and say, "Now you had toys. We didn't have a lot of toys. We had," she would give us cardboard and tape and motors for my brothers. And so you built things. And it was wonderful because it really encouraged a lot of creativity in the three of us. So we had my mom, this is how cool my mom is. We had a trampoline in the backyard. And in the winter, because we live where it snows a lot, she allowed us to take all the furniture out of the living room and put the trampoline in the living room. So
no way! Wow!
I'm talking a full-size trampoline. I'm not talking about the the little indoor ones that people are used to now. And isn't that cute? And you bounce for a minute. This was a full-blown, full-size trampoline.
It kind of makes me wonder if she was just so desperate. She's like, you know what? I don't care. Just bring in the trampoline.
I think she might have been. keep these kids occupied.
In the winter, yes, exactly. She's like, these kids are going to bounce off the walls, so we'll just have them bounce on the trampoline.
Yeah, we'll just let that happen.
When I read in your book, Dancing with Max, which we're going to talk about later, but when I read that about... When you said the trampoline in the living room, at first I thought the little one. And then as you described it, I thought, oh my word, her mom is amazing. She let them bring in the big one. But I loved hearing about your mom because, of course, I have many of your dad's books on the bookshelf behind me. And just in you sharing about your mom and how, you would go to D.C., you're doing all these big formal, things like you said that a lot of people didn't get to do. But then you go back home and you go to this little school where there's, not a lot of students, and your mom, was like, made you guys work and didn't have a lot of flashy toys. And I thought, this is why Emily's such a well-rounded, wonderful person, because she had, you learned early, like, okay, life looks different depending on where you're at.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for that, Erin. Yeah, I'm very grateful. It was a wonderful balance. I think if we had only been in that soup of Washington, that stew. We just would be very different people than we are. But my mom, so balanced and so kind. And one of the things that one of the gifts that my mom gave all three of us, and some of the listeners might relate to this, is that when there's a divorce, it's very easy for a parent to be unkind to the other. And it can be in front of the kids, or it can be to the kids. And the gift that my mom gave us is that she was so kind and always said lovely things about my dad, and he's such a good man, and he loves you so much. And what she did in that, which, knowing my mom, it probably wasn't self-sacrificing, but what she did is that she opened the door for us to have a relationship with my dad, so that she put her foot in the door to keep that door open, so that when my dad did become a Christian, that door was open. There was no, sense of, am I betraying my mom if I now become close with my dad too? And it was just an extraordinary gift and a great lesson to all of us, to those certainly who have gone through the pain and struggle of divorce, how important it is that we show respect for the other parent.
So, okay, I have so many questions right now, but because you're saying that, and then your dad goes to prison, and she's still,
saying
still
he is a good
careful. Man. Wow.
Oh, saying he does not deserve to be there. He is a good man. He should not be there. Oh,
and it's just human nature to want to be vindicated a bit, like, serves him right. But that's pretty. It's pretty impressive. But okay, the other question that comes to mind is, we know your dad was not a believer at that time. What was your mom's faith like in your growing up years?
Oh, my mom, who is so wonderful, tried very, very hard to take us to church. She did take us to church. We were, I'm not sure what the word for it might be. We figured out that it was really fun to shoot little spitballs through straws, and we'd try to land them in people's hats, and we were loud and wiggly, and I mean, it was horrendous. I don't know that there was a place that we were behaved more badly than when it was like free reign. As maybe we didn't want to be there. I don't think there was anything that enticed me being there, honestly. The Sunday school, I remember how bad the illustrations were in the Bible that they showed the kids. Yeah. that was the budding artist in me. Those are bad illustrations. She tried so hard, and I'm grateful for that, because it really was our introduction to faith and to God, when my dad was sort of nowhere on that scene. I think over time, my mom just had to let it go a little bit, because it was maybe the church asked us, would you mind not coming? It would be really great.
That's hilarious. They're like, have you ever read the Best Christmas Pageant Ever? This is what's flashing through my mind right now. The Herdmans, and they're like, oh no, here comes the Herdmans. They're like, oh no, here comes Emily.
Here come the Colsons.
Right.
There are probably some people that remember that are still around, that are saying, hey, I remember that Colson family, they were really something in church. Yeah.
So you grew up going to church, and then, at least with your mom, and then your dad, is working in the White House, and the Watergate scandal happens, which for our young listeners, if you don't know this story, you need to. It's a part of American history. But so Nixon, this is what leads to his resignation, and your father and several others actually went to prison because of it.
Exactly.
And it was before your dad actually went into prison that he came to Christ. Is that right?
Correct. That's right.
So maybe you could just tell it like from the daughter's perspective of what's going on with dad.
Yeah.
And I loved in your book how you talked about, I mean, your school sounded like a kind of safe haven as far, because it was smaller. So it wasn't, but I would just love to hear from your perspective about that happening and then your dad coming to faith.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think with my dad, it was always a whirlwind. So when I was young, it was just I don't even know if I could put into words the energy, of my dad in this absolute driven forward motion individual, super type A, right? And he was just driven at that goal that he was that he achieved when he got to the White House. I think when my dad got to the White House, that was such an unusual situation, right? That my friends in school, their dads were not doing that. It was a lot to take in. And then very soon after, right, within a couple of years, we're going to the White House. We're going to events at the White House, Christmas at the White House. I'm terrified, really, meeting the president. I'm a young teenager, right? And sixth grade, seventh grade, absolutely terrified. And that was such a whirlwind. And then Watergate begins, and Watergate became the whirlwind. And this is before social media. But if people could imagine, if there was something that mimicked social media, the intensity of social media, it was Watergate. It was everyone's conversation. Everybody's television set was, that's all that you could get, right? And so it was nonstop. And then as we're realizing that, I don't think we really had a sense that my dad was going to go to prison. I don't think that we thought that was going to be the case. But it was difficult and dark. And my dad, in the midst of his deepest brokenness, thought about his friend Tom Phillips, who was CEO of Raytheon. And my dad had done work for Tom Phillips as an attorney. My dad had represented them. And my dad knew that there was something different about Tom Phillips. And he knew there was something about his faith. And so one night my dad was here visiting his parents and us in outside of Boston. And he called his friend Tom and asked to go and meet with him. And it was that night when Tom shared his faith, and my dad was uncomfortable with it. He was uncomfortable praying. And that night, my dad gave his life to Christ and completely surrendered. That's almost, it's hard for me to talk about. It's so amazing. Yeah. I went back a few years ago and sat at the end of that driveway where my dad wept and gave his life to Christ. And it was really extraordinary to do that and just allow myself to be present in that, and how my life changed and his life changed and my son's life has changed and thousands of lives have changed because he surrendered in that driveway. Mm-hmm. At the time my dad did that, I had no idea what that was. It was just like, oh, okay, he went to the White House. Oh, wow. And now he is, Watergate, and wow. And now I have no idea what this means. He's a Christian. I don't know what that is. And it was all so confusing. And of course, the press got it. And I don't even remember how I heard. I think my mom told me. I think maybe she read it somewhere or she saw it on the news or something. And none of us could quite figure out what was going on. And then, of course, not long after that, he was sentenced to prison and sentenced to one to 3 years, which we did not imagine would happen. And I remember hearing the news. Of course, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have anything. My mom heard it. And when I came home from school, she told me. And I remember running in my room and turning on the television just to sort of drown my thoughts out. And then there on the television screen comes we interrupt this program for this news bulletin. And there was my dad's picture and the sentence written on the screen. And I just remember calculating in my mind, wait a minute, 3 years. He's going to miss my high school graduation. And, sort of like you just don't know how to even process that. And then comes the experience that is maybe as extraordinary as going into the White House. And that is visiting my dad in prison. And
like from the top to the very bottom, like those two, that's the most extreme thing you can kind of think about.
Yeah. And how God humbled him. I think about one of the favorite clips I have, the favorite video clips I have of my dad is when he was sentenced, he was given the choice that he could sneak out the back and get away from the press, or he could walk out the front door, but he was going to be overwhelmed by the press. And he said, I want to go out to the front. And so he walked out the front door and he made a very short statement. And he said, I'm not going to say anything else. But he said, I just want to say this. He said something like, I accept this sentence as the Lord's will. He said, I've given my life to Christ. Now he's a new Christian, right? And here he is with the press hanging on him. And you can hear the helicopter above. And you can see somebody climbing the wall behind him, trying to get a closer picture of him. And he said, I've given my life to Christ. And he said, I can serve the Lord in prison or out of prison. This is the Lord's will. And I accept it. And of course, he'd never been in a prison. He had no idea that God would grow this amazing prison ministry because of the time that he served there.
And so just for the listeners that are just being introduced to who Chuck is, he went on to start Prison Fellowship, which has had a huge impact. And then about 25 years ago, is that about right? Okay, he started the Colson Center for Christian Worldview because, and correct me if I'm wrong on these details, Emily, but because he was looking at the prisons and going, we need people to think well and know why they believe what they believe, so we can catch people before they make all these mistakes.
Exactly.
And so he started the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, which is really what brought Emily and I together as friends, because John took, after Chuck passed in 2012, John is my husband. He took over as, well, a couple of different things happened, but along the way, but eventually took over as the president for the Colson Center. And I just have to, before we move any further in the story, I just have to say how grateful we are for Chuck's life and for his mentoring of John and his kindness towards me. And I just remember when it was definitely God's hand in forming that friendship between John and Chuck. And John was considering going to get his PhD. And Chuck had already kind of started a relationship with him. And John said, well, here's what I'm considering. And Chuck said, well, I have about 2 more years in my life, and I think you should come work for me and be mentored by me. And John was like, well, that seems like a word from God. So, so that drastically changed the trajectory of our lives. And so we're so grateful for that. And I do have to say one funny story, because the first time I met Chuck, I was so nervous because it was Chuck and Patty at their Naples home in Florida. And so I was like, we should get a house gift because we're going to their house, and I got to see his little closet with the microphone and everything, which was funny, where he did Breakpoint.
Yes.
And I was like already a Breakpoint listener and was like super fan. So I've got that going for me too. And so I bring a plant. Every time he saw me after that, he would say, that plant is still doing so good. We've got it right there. And I was like, you know what? I kind of wonder if he wrote that in a daytimer or some kind of calendar, because it was so intentional that he was like, I'm going to connect and see her because of this plant. Like, that was our connection, the plant, which is hilarious because I kill all my plants. So I'm actually not a plant girl. But anyway, so we go and we're driving to lunch, and I was so worried that Patty was going to be like very prim and proper. And as you know, she's just as down to earth as could be,
funny,
yes, hilarious.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Catch you off guard.
Oh, yeah. So we walked in, and actually Chuck starts hiding romance novels. I don't know if this was like a Patty thing or if it was just at that time she happened to be reading them, but he's like shoving them in a corner, which was hilarious. And then we get in the car, and we're in the back. Patty and I are in the back. Chuck and John are in the front talking about something amazing. And I'm just trying to make conversation with Patty. And I said, I can't believe that he can think. Now I know the secret sauce of how Breakpoint is made. It is a whole team. I get that now. But at the time, I'm like, how can Chuck be so amazingly smart and on top of things to think of something new to say every day? And Patty goes, do you listen to him? And I said, oh, yeah. She smacks Chuck on the shoulder. She's like, honey, she listens to you. Then she turns to me. She goes, I don't even listen to him. And I was just cracking up. Anyway, I just had to tell that story because it's so dear. They're just that I just am so grateful for their lives, and then it brought us together as friends too. But
she had a way of, and my dad did too, of absolutely taking off that nervousness that people had, when they would meet them, and oh my goodness, here they are. What do I do? What do I say? And
that's probably why she said all that. She's like, girl, calm down.
No, I was kind of normal.
Yeah.
My dad would always joke that she would keep him humble, whatever it was. She would make sure that he didn't get too full of himself all the time.
Right.
She would
that
take
is
care
hilarious.
Of that.
Yeah. Okay, but let's go back and talk about, all right, now your dad has come to the faith. You're in high school or in middle school. Tell us about your faith journey from there.
I think I began to get curious, really curious about God when I was in high school. And I don't think I even understood that I should, this is going to sound funny, but I didn't really understand that maybe I should act on that there were things I should do to pursue learning about God. It didn't occur to me that maybe I should ask my dad, it just didn't, that didn't cross my mind. But I began to become very curious, and there was a girl in high school who approached me and witnessed to me and asked me, if I wanted to accept Christ in my life, and I said yes. And she prayed for me, and I meant yes. I just didn't really know what that meant. And it was not until after college. Well, okay, it's not true. I prayed a lot, but I always prayed, here's what I want.
Yeah.
through college. Right. And somehow that's okay. That's when you don't really have quite the depth of your understanding and faith, and you might see God as the genie in the bottle who, you will give me this. So it really wasn't until I was in really my late 20s, mid 20s, that I began to get really curious. And the funny thing is, it really is odd, but my life was so lovely at that time that I began to think, I wonder if this is all there is. It seems like there's supposed to be something, some more depth, because it was just really working. And I was married, a husband I loved, a beautiful home. I loved my career as a designer, creative director, art director, and everything felt kind of tidy. And I kept thinking, I feel like there should be something more. So I began reading the Bible, but of course it looked really big. So I thought, well, I'll just start with the end and see how it turns out. And then maybe if I want to read the rest, seems good. So I started with Revelation.
That's a little scary to start with.
It is. But God knows. This is the cool thing. He really knows. So my art brain, I read this and I'm thinking, so this is what my grandmother would go in her room and close the door and read her Bible for an hour every day and underline. This is so cool. There are all these winged beasts and eyes all over it. So it absolutely caught my imagination. And then my dad saw the Bible out in my home, and of course he was so cool about it. So who's reading that? He must have been exploding inside. And so he asked about what I was reading, and then he said, you should read John. And that was sort of the start of my my journey. And I'm thankful because I began to study, and I just couldn't believe how rich this was and how amazing this was. I couldn't get enough. And I'm so thankful because then when life became really difficult, I already had that foundation that I knew God has something in this. He has me. He has me in this, and he has not dropped me. And I can hold on to him, and I have no idea what's going on, but I know this. If I don't know anything else, I know this. God loves me, and he is holding me, and he's doing something, even when my life feels like it's just fallen into the pit. And he has carried me.